do that preliminary analysis to inform, you know, what may be the best governance approach.
We discussed this very much this morning, and that's why, you know, I mean, I cannot really summarize it everything here, but conservation de jure, in fact, it is looking at the protected area legislation very specifically in the country, because that is what determines the typology that can be called the protected areas, and can, for instance, in a country such as Colombia, can allow a particular part of the country not to be subjected to the invasion of mining companies and oil extraction companies. This is something very, very major and important. If you are declared a protected area, you will not have to be subjected to certain concessions. So it's a very major piece of legislation that we are talking about. At the same time, for governance, as we discussed, it is crucial importance to know who are the right holders and what type of de facto governance types we have on the ground, on the basis of many things: land ownership, customary rights, all sorts of, even having the guns, as we were saying this morning. So these things are well taken, except that, you know, we need to take some steps, you know, in some ways. So conservation de jure is the one relating specifically to protected area law, and spatial analysis then becomes a tremendously important step for the whole of conservation in the landscape, as we were saying. I mean, it's exactly what Lea is bringing about, that we need to look much beyond protected areas in order to do a meaningful governance assessment for protected areas. So, what this PIBIS means is an acronym invented on the top of a hat. It means territories and areas of particular importance for biodiversity, ecosystem functions, and other associated values. Where would you really like to conserve what you have of value on your landscape? These are the PIBIS, just to have a short way to call them, okay? Then, on these PIBIS, you may want first to map, overlay the existing protected areas. Then you may want to map and overlay, as we were saying this morning, the conserved areas by the private sector, by the local communities and indigenous peoples. And then you may want to map and overlay the concessions, for instance, the plans for the freeway, the plans for the new urban expansion, the concession for mining, the concession for timber extraction, and so on. So when you have all these different layers nicely put on top of each other, you may indeed identify areas that have different governance to run what happens there. And you can identify conservation gaps. In particular, PIBIS, these very precious areas that are totally left without governance for conservation or governance for protection. It's really a lot to chew in one line, so bear with me. It's something that we all may want to think through, and it is much more detailed in the document. The IUCN matrix analysis is what you have seen before for Madagascar, for instance. And, oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. So it is an analysis of where we fit all the elements, all the protected areas in the system within the matrix, and whether there is a skewed distribution, whether there is a distribution that is hanging all in one corner, or is a pretty well distributed set of options that are taken for the protected areas in the country. So with all these steps, and I'm sure you will have many more, there is a product that is a preliminary, yes, maybe. It's an assessment of some sort of the governance of the system of protected area. I think I've already discussed a little bit this, but conservation de jure would give us a sense of really of the variety of protected areas, the governance of protected areas that is possible. In some places you can have the four. In other places you can have only one of the types. So how diverse is the system in terms of governance types is also an important dimension to characterize the system as a whole. The spatial analysis is what we just discussed. Sorry, I forgot that I had more detailed slides to go through. But it's basically what we just discussed, the overlaying of the different types of area-based situations that we can have. And these are some images that can tell you about, and I see Kyle, as soon as a map is up, she raises her eyes. So this is an example of land uses and identified conservation priorities for the Central Karoo Biodiversity Plan, which comes from the land of Sandy. And why we deal with land uses as a sort of proxy for what you were talking about. You know, as a land uses and then tenure situation, and then there are many, many layers of situations that we may need to take into account. And in some cases, because they are large and chunky, it's easy. In other cases, because it's extremely fragmented, it may not be very easy. But hopefully something can be said. This is a map that I like either Kyle or Dave to describe. Or Giovanni. Because it comes from the Philippines and...
Well, that map shows the green ones are the remaining forests of the Philippines, and the red line shows where the national parks are. It clearly shows that we have not been able to provide a structure of protection over the remaining forests. However, you see the green lines, the blue polygons, those are ancestral domains. Meaning, ancestral domains cover more of the forested areas than national parks. So we can deduce that those areas are being protected by indigenous communities rather than government-established parks.
Where is the national park that you were referring to?
No, it's not there, it's another place.
In 1995, a study in Madagascar said that 80% of the biodiversity of Madagascar lays out of the system of out of the protected, official protected areas.
Yeah.
80% in 1995. And there is one thing that bothers me is when we say system of protected areas. I think that when you speak of PIBIS, that the important biodiversity, the most important are PIBIS. And I think protected areas is only one element of important biodiversity.
Absolutely. That's why we are doing this analysis. That's what we discovered by doing this analysis. I mean, we did look at this morning actually, but it is exactly what Dave said. By overlaying the PIBIS with the protected areas, you discover that the protected areas are not responsible for the conservation of the PIBIS, and something else is responsible. So what is it that's something else? That's a crucial question. And what governs that something else is the crucial step of the governance analysis subsequent to the spatial analysis.
Perhaps later, the assessment of the governance of the PIBIS may lead to the conclusion that we have to govern not only for example, WCPA or governance of PA, but governance of Paris and
Yes,
and
that's
system
what.
of Paris.
Absolutely. We may want to have protected areas according to the definition of the state or IUCN, and very importantly, conserved areas by the private sector, by the communities and indigenous peoples of this world, who actually are doing, like in this case, a very good job. So we are opening up the box of protected areas and saying, well, you know, we may, and that's what CBD has been doing. CBD, with Target 11 of Aichi, is saying we need to reach 17% terrestrial and 10% marine with protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures. That's what we are dealing with. That's why we are doing this. It's really exactly what you said. That's another example from Latin America. Maybe Paula knows this. I mean, this is not Colombia, but is Bolivia. But this is something very interesting that you can. In fact, Carmen is here. What am I talking about? Here you have an overlay between two types of land appellation, if you want. One is our familiar protected areas, and the other one is the territorio ¿cómo se llama? Territorio me mata siempre. Tierras comunitarias de origen. The communal land of origin of the indigenous peoples of Bolivia, which are more and more actually being assigned under collective governance to the indigenous peoples that live and relate to them. So an overlay between the Tierras Comunitarias de Origen and the protected areas can tell us a lot. Can tell us how much has been taken from the Tierras Comunitarias to make protected areas, can tell us what the people have been able to try to recover, and much about who has been conserving the PIBIS, if we want to adopt that thing, in that particular country and region. So I'm just introducing what you may want to discuss more in detail with Kyle and Dave and Giovanni around the issues of land spatial analysis and governance analysis embedded into that spatial analysis, which is, for what we suggest, crucial to the assessment and evaluation. This is what we already discussed, so I'm going to skip on this. And the IUCN matrix analysis is what we also saw for Madagascar. This is something that was done, in fact, this very year, 2012, for the country of Albania. Look how similar it looks for the country of Madagascar, what we had seen an hour ago. It's just that there is only one governance type that is accepted within the protected area system of the country, and much that exists is left totally unprotected. I wouldn't give a damn, sincerely, if not that there are very many forces in this world that are really attacking whatever is left of biodiversity. And these forces, if they are not kept in check in some ways, are going to really eat up all the rest of the space. So, 3 steps for the evaluation of the system of protected areas are proposed. And as you can imagine, all these steps have lots of details, and I'm having to run through this. But is governance fitting the context? Or can governance types better fit the specificity of the context? And there is a tool that we have sort of to use, which is the same that we looked at before. Flexibility of the legal framework. Is it possible, in the case of Albania that we just saw, is it possible for the de jure system for protected areas to possibly open up to other governance types, to shared governance, to protected areas governed by the private sector or by indigenous peoples and local communities. And then the whole gamut of good governance vis-à-vis the criteria that we have looked at, and of course, after evaluation action. Taking action, there is plenty that needs to be done, but the bulk of action may have to really respond to problems and opportunities that have been identified. Then there should be some inclusion of governance indicators in the regular monitoring and evaluation exercises, and the delivery of reports to CBD and COPA, to the focal points in the countries, but also beyond. And of course, in the report, there should be reporting about governance to the international databases. UNEP WCMC includes such databases for the government-governed protected areas, and also for the ICCAs in the ICCA registry. Now I'm done and finished, I shut up, and we are going to have setting up 5 stations where there is going to be a carousel exercise. How many of you have ever done a carousel exercise? Would you mind raising your hand if you've ever done it? No one has ever done a carousel exercise? Ah, she has done. Leah, have you done it?
I don't know if you call it carousel.
Can you explain what?
Nobody else? Yes, I will. Okay, so we have proposed 5 stations. 5 station means 5 corners, 5 places. In some cases, there will be mostly talking without much of the maps and visual support, so it's enough to have one table, like the office of a lawyer. I'm pretty sure that there will be an office of lawyers around maybe this table with a few guidelines and a few examples in their heads, and they are going to have the station of the legal recognition of different governance types. Different countries have different models for recognition. So Barbara Lausche, Ben Burr, and Harry Jonas and Holly Schramm will populate, let's say, this table so that people can come in small groups and converse with them about that topic. That's going to be station number 1. Station number 2 is reporting of governance. Reporting of governance for the protected area and ICCA databases and registries at UNEP WCMC, and also reporting for World Heritage Sites. So Colleen, who is there, yes, and Bulun, who have experience on these things, may want to set up station somewhere else. Maybe Colleen and Bulun, is that okay that you sit on that table there? The one close, because everybody's going to have to stand up. I'm sorry about that, but everybody's going to move through the station. So, no, not yet. So you're going to take station there. Then there is that station, which is the very visible one with the maps. Tools for spatial analysis of governance. GIS, mapping, Google Earth tool, and I understand that Kyle was now looking at Google and those tools. And Kyle, Dave, and Giovanni can probably help people down there. Is that okay? Yeah. And then we can have another, maybe here on that table, another station for the tool about appropriateness of governance type. I have some copies of that tool. If people are interested, we can go through them together and we can figure out whether it makes sense or it doesn't make sense at all. And Stan and I will be sitting there and looking at the appropriateness of that stuff. And then finally, maybe in this side, Barbara, if you don't mind, that particular table, yeah. There will be another tool that is proposed, that is a set of questions to go through to just start thinking about quality of governance for a site or for a system. So, what about everybody else? everybody else pulls together as possibly 5 small groups. So everybody else is going to have a number, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the group 1 starts in one station, the group 2 in another one, the group 3 in another one, and sit covering all the stations. And then when there is a ding, all the stations rotate and they move to another area of direct inquiry. It's not rocket science, really. Huh? It may sound a little bit complicated, but it's actually fun. And you get to speak one-to-one, which is what usually helps understanding things best. So may I ask people to start giving themselves numbers? That's lovely, Sandy. Thank you so much. 1. So I see, is that possible to have a 2?